Okay, so what we're doing today is we're trying to determine whether or not we have enough information to say that something's a parallelogram. So up until this point, we've been telling you it's a parallelogram. And if it's a parallelogram, then all these properties apply. Well, today we're going to be working in the opposite direction. I'm going to give you some pieces of information, and we're going to try and figure out, is that enough to say that it's a parallelogram? Do I have enough information? So there are different conditions that if you know that information, and only that information, that is sufficient enough. That's enough. Sufficient means enough. That's enough information to prove that it's a parallelogram. So you don't, it's almost like a shortcut. Like if you just know this stuff, that's enough to say, aha, it's definitely a parallelogram. So our first condition is if you know that both pairs of opposite sides of that quadrilateral, if you know that both pairs of opposite sides are parallel, that's enough to say it's a parallelogram. So if I know one pair of opposite sides are parallel, and I know my second pair of opposite sides are parallel, if I know that both of the pairs of opposite sides are parallel, that's enough info to say, I don't need to know anything else about this quadrilateral. That's enough for me to say it's a parallelogram. The second condition, if I know that both pairs of opposite sides are congruent, so if I know this pair of opposite sides are congruent, and then I know my second pair of opposite sides are congruent. So it's not one pair, it's both pairs. You have to know both pairs of opposite sides are congruent, and then that's enough info. I don't need to know anything else. I don't need to know anything about the angles. I don't need to know anything about the diagonals. If I know both pairs of opposite sides of this quadrilateral are congruent, that's enough info, and I can say it is a parallelogram. My third condition is if I have one pair of opposite sides that is parallel and congruent at the same time. So parallel I mark with the arrows. Congruent I mark with the tick marks. So notice this pair of opposite sides is simultaneously, so at the same time, those sides are parallel and congruent. If I know that one pair of opposite sides is parallel and congruent at the same time, that's enough info to say that this figure is definitely 100% a parallelogram. Number 4, if I know that both pairs of opposite angles are congruent, so this angle is congruent to this angle, and this angle is congruent to this angle. If I know that both pairs of opposite angles, not just one pair, but both pairs of opposite angles are congruent, that's enough info to say that that's a parallelogram. I don't have to know anything about the sides. I don't have to know anything about the diagonals. As long as I know that both pairs of opposite angles are congruent, that's sufficient info to say it's a parallelogram. If I know that two pairs of consecutive angles are supplementary, that's a lot of words. Okay, so consecutive angles are back to back, so this angle and this angle. So if I know that these angles are supplementary, so if I know that angle A and angle B are supplementary, and if I know angle B and angle C are supplementary, if I know angle B and angle C are supplementary, I don't have to know anything about angle D, but if I know A and B are supplementary, B and C are supplementary, or if I had known that B and C were supplementary and C and D were supplementary, two pairs, one pair, A and B, second pair, B and C. If I know that two pairs of consecutive angles are supplementary, that's enough info to say that this is a parallelogram. So maybe if I knew that this was 100 degrees, and this was 80 degrees, 180 add together to be 180, so those angles are supplementary. And then if I also know that angle C is 100 degrees, that would make B and C supplementary as well. So that's enough info to say that it's a parallelogram. I don't have to know anything about angle D. I don't have to know anything about the sides. This is sufficient info to say it's a parallelogram. And then finally, if I know that both diagonals bisect each other, both diagonals cut each other in half, this segment is congruent to this segment, and this segment is congruent to this segment. That's all I know. I don't know anything about the angles. I don't know anything about the opposite sides. Nothing. All I know is that the two diagonals, that both of those diagonals are bisecting each other. That is sufficient info to say that that figure is a parallelogram. That's all I need to know to say it's a parallelogram.